Perfect. Thank you so much, Craig, and welcome everybody. We're really excited about this and happy to have you guys. As Craig mentioned, I am Zane, and this is my partner Hattie, and we're here representing SwiftRacks. We are a digital product development team. We focus on idea validation, market research, and also help with prototyping and development as well. So the reason we're here today, obviously, is to dive a little bit deeper into idea validation, making sure that when you have a business idea, you really take the time to understand your market, understand your product, understand who desires it, and do all the legwork before you start spending.
The
Did we lose Zane again?
Yeah, we lost Zane again.
Hello?
Hey, Zane.
Sorry, guys. I'm not sure what's going on. It keeps disconnecting, but where did you guys lose me?
Just a little bit after the intro.
Okay. Yeah, no worries. So again, we're here to discuss idea validation. We're representing SwiftRacks. We do digital product development. Sorry, I'm just going to go on. So first, before we even dive into idea validation, I think it's important that we first of all define what a startup is, and then look into the. You guys can hear me, right? I'm checking out now.
No, you're good. You're good.
Okay, perfect. So what is a startup? Here I've got two definitions for what a startup is. And the first is a company or project undertaken by an entrepreneur to seek, develop, and validate a scalable business model. The second definition, which is relatively the same, but just to get perspective, is a startup is a temporary organization in search of its business model. So oftentimes people throw the word startup around. Is it an early stage company? Is it generating no revenue? Like, how long does it have to be a startup? The best way to really understand what a startup is to go through a few key metrics. So some of the common characteristics you'll see between a startup and a company that's matured and is no longer considered a startup would be the scale of the business. So once you reach a certain threshold of employees, revenue, or market presence that's considered measurable or impactful, that's usually a good indication that it's no longer a startup. Next is profitability. So when they don't, a big part of the early stage companies is relying on investment.
You cut out again, Zane. Something's going on there.
Yeah, Zane. Sorry, guys. You cut out at
Yeah,
second.
I'm back. Yep. So profitability, when they actually make their own money or generating their own revenue and can sustain their own operations, they're usually no longer a startup. Next is product market fit. So when a company is starting out, once the hypothesis is proven and the business idea has been validated correctly, the company usually is no longer a startup, meaning there's no validation required and it's time to actually launch revenue streams. The next is communication, right? So normally in a startup, everybody's messaging on text or on Slack. There's no real systems or departmentalization in the business. So once it gets to a certain stage where it's actually got departments, got different VPs or different heads, and there's no longer the cross-functional overlap and chaos, usually not a startup. And the last is innovation. So a big piece of startups and nurturing development is the actual innovation piece that takes place in the business. Once a company reaches a point where they're no longer really innovating and they're starting to run their day-to-day operations, usually not a startup. So just a general idea of what a startup is and what it is not. Now let's take a look at some key characteristics of the industry of the startups itself. So the first thing we want to take a look at is the top reasons that they fail. So some of that could be there's no market, like they actually haven't validated and nobody actually wants their product. Another big issue that usually goes hand in hand with that is that they run out of cash. This can often happen because they don't have strategy, they don't have direction, they don't really know what the product's supposed to do or what the people want. This also goes in with an inexperienced team. So almost a little over 20% of businesses fail because maybe it's their first time doing it. The founders haven't really got a lot of experience starting businesses, so they often don't know what to do. Some of the other reasons could be competition, cost issues, just an overall poor product that's just not going to deliver, no business model, or poor marketing. In parallel with that, in a 10-year time horizon, let's say hypothetically 10 businesses are started on day one. At the end of the first year, 2 out of those 10 businesses normally fail, followed by another business in the second year. Then by end of year 5, we're getting up to almost half of those businesses that started inevitably failing for many different reasons. And by the end of year 10, almost 7 out of 10 of those businesses inevitably fail. I know 10 years sounds like a long time, but realistically, that's not a lot of time to actually, fail a business. It's actually quite sad and quite scary. Some other key metrics we can take a look at. Startups that normally pivot their business, so after validating or after getting some research, changing their model, normally have a 3.6 better user growth and raise 2.5 times more money than businesses that don't pivot or pivot too often. Also, startups take 2 to 3 times longer to validate their market than most founders expect. We're going to learn a little bit more about this as we progress through the slide, but there's way too many assumptions and way too much guessing from founders, and they don't actually validate correctly. Finally, founders overestimate the value of intellectual property before product market fit by 255%. 255%. So they don't actually put the correct value on their property or their IT or their software, and they just make way too many assumptions to be successful. So looking at this big picture, it's really hard for startups to actually succeed. So validation is extremely important. So now that we have an idea of what a startup is and some of the stats in the industry, I'm actually going to hand it over to my partner Hadi, who's going to dive a little bit deeper into how to actually validate correctly.
Perfect. Thank you, Zane. Thank you for the intro. To give you guys a little overview, what I'll be talking about, essentially I'll be going over the approach and mindset you should have for idea validation, also some of the fundamental tools you need to support your activities and decision making, and also the risks that you should consider when validating, how to conduct validation experiments, and what the outcomes and benefits are of the process. To start off, I'll be going into approach and the mindset you should have. And essentially, number one is you should follow a data-informed decision-making process. What this means is when you have an idea, you might have some intuitive decisions that you want to make, but when you lay down the overall idea and the strategy you want to lay down, you're going to have a lot of assumptions that you'll be making. To make decisions about those assumptions and the strategy and the product itself, you should use data to drive that. And the way to do that is through the second point that we have here, and that's through experiments. Experiments are essentially any activity that you conduct that brings in data that either supports or refutes your assumption or your hypothesis that you want to validate. When it comes to experiments, we'll be going over in detail how they'll be conducted and what you should be designing experiments for. But to move on, the third point is the cross-functional collaboration. There are a lot of commonly required skills to test and build businesses. Essentially, you should have the skill set of design, sales, marketing, research, tech, legal, data, finance. You may not have all of them, but you should be utilizing as many as you can. And if you don't have those human resources, then you should leverage technology to support you. And the fourth point is data transparency. When you're conducting experiments and you're working together as a cross-functional team, you want to expose all the data that you're getting through the experiments to the entire team so you could collaborate and design your experiments, but also your strategy and make decisions about your product and your solution. And lastly, it's having the mindset of being open to new ideas constantly. When we go in with an idea and we believe in it, we might be focused on a specific outcome that we're looking for, but the market may not be looking for it. So it's really important to take in everybody's opinions from the customer support all the way to sales, marketing, and your engineers and design to really build on your ideas and find the best solution that serves your market. So that's high level about the approach and mindset. Next, would like to start with the fundamental tools that you should be using. So there are obviously a lot of tools you could be utilizing to go about your product discovery and validation and your idea validation. But the most important that we recommend a lot of people probably know about this is the business model canvas. Essentially, this is the building blocks of your business. From our experience, we've worked with entrepreneurs and teams where they've jumped to building a business plan and they write paragraphs and paragraphs about the market, what they're going for, their strategy, also the projections of their financial projections of their business. But when you're validating, you're bringing in data all the time. And for you to make decisions and about your strategy and product, it's really hard to have that being conducted on a business plan, because there's so many moving parts and you're editing paragraphs, and it's hard for the team to digest what's going on. So the first thing is to lay down a business model canvas. This lets you high level lay down your market risk, your infrastructure, also your financials, your cost and revenue. That way, everybody has a snapshot of what's going on in your business at all times and know what the strategy is, right? So who your customer segments are, what your value proposition is, how you're going to deliver on that, and also what you're thinking in terms of cost and revenue. The second is the value proposition canvas, and that is essentially your customer profile, who you're targeting, and the assumptions you have about them. On the left side of the value prop, you have your pains, gains, and customer jobs. Essentially, those lay down what your customers really experience when it comes to the pains related to that problem, and also the customer job they need to conduct to solve those pains, and the gains out of solving those pains. On the right side, which is a reflection of what the customer's problems are, is your product and service and what you're providing to solve the customer's problem. Once you have laid down these two tools and you have filled them out, you will have a high level overview of who you're targeting, what the customers, who they are, and what they're facing. And also you have your business side of things, where how you're going to conduct your business and execute on it. You need to treat these as a livable document. These documents, they will allow you to constantly iterate over your business model. So for example, in week one, when you start working on your idea, you're going to lay down your high level strategy and building blocks. As you get more data and make more decisions, it's constantly going to change, and you're going to need to iterate over it until you get to the model that actually works and generates a lot of revenue and reduces your cost and so forth. So high level, those tools we definitely recommend. They keep the team aligned and have a really good understanding of what the business model is at any given time, for the team to know how to conduct experiments and bring in new data. Now, the next slide would like to talk about the risks, the main risks that you want to validate. Different startups and different teams have different data at hand for different problems and ideas. But essentially, there's three risks that you want to validate. And that's first, you want to validate if your idea is desirable, if there's a market for it. The desirable section is essentially the market risk that you have, the assumptions that you have for the desirability of your idea. Feasible, whether it's feasible or not, this is if you can actually pull off the value proposition to those customers. And lastly, we have the should we do this, which is the viability of the business. Does the revenue make sense? Can we keep the cost lower? Is this business scalable? Is it worth pursuing in general? Those three are the most important. And if you use the business model canvas, you have the desirability, which is the right side of the business model canvas. The left side is the feasibility, and the bottom is your viability of the business. Now, one last thing about the risks, you want to validate them in those order. You want to validate the market risk first, then the infrastructure, and then the financial risk. If you do that in that order, you will first identify the most important things about your customer and the problems that they're facing. Then you will move on to what type of infrastructure you need to support the solution you'll be presenting to the customers. And then lastly, how you're going to sell it, and if it's worth pursuing at all when it comes to the financial risk you'll be taking on. At a high level, those are the main points that you want to address. First, we'll start off with the desirability, how to go about testing your market risk. Essentially, you want to identify the most urgent and important problem that your early adopter is facing. And what do we mean by that? When you have an idea, first you want to figure out who you are serving and what the most important urgent problem they're facing, because if you don't have the understanding of the problem and understanding the root cause of the problem, you may be solving the wrong problem or the right customer, you're solving for the wrong customer segment. So for example, if you have a problem that's not urgent for the customer, they may not be willing to pay for it. And if it's urgent, but you can't have a problem that's that's not important, not urgent. So the other point is you want to identify the niche of your solution. Essentially, that's the early adopter. When we talk about crossing the chasm, the early market, if you look at the graph, the first two segments are your innovators and your early adopters. Though you need to identify in your industry or the customer segment that you're addressing, you need to find out who are your innovators and who are your early adopters. Those people are the ones that are willing to take a risk and try your product because they really need their problem solved, and there's nothing on the market that exists that solves their problem as of now. So once you identify the customer who has an important urgent problem that they need to solve, and they're underserved and they're willing to test out your solution, then you need to build your product for them. You focus your solution and everything that you have for your first version of your product towards them. That will enable you to narrow down your scope, lay down a clear solution that's minimal. It does not require you to address the whole addressable market, which may require a lot of features and a lot of money and resources to actually develop. So that is one of the most important things that you need to watch out for when it comes to the market risk. And also there are different ways you can experiment. For example, I'll give you an example when it comes to Airbnb, which is a famous one. For when Airbnb was starting out, the way they tested if their business would work was they essentially set up mattresses in someone's home, and they put up an ad on Craigslist, and they wanted to see if somebody would be willing to pay for rent at someone's home at an affordable rate, like $30 at the time. Once they found out that people are willing to go over at someone's home, pay an affordable rate to be able to stay, they identified people are willing to pay for it, and that was a really critical step. That okay, there's a need for this. So that's the desirability. For the next risk that we have is the feasibility of your business. So this is the infrastructure. Once you identify the key resources, partners, and activities that you need to manage and scale the business, you need to figure out if it is possible to attain those. For example, if you need partners or certain resources, you need to find out if you're able to acquire those and also be able to use them and scale them as your user base grows. The second thing, important thing that you want to do from a digital product, for example, is your solution technically feasible? For example, if you're building an application that needs to integrate with other systems, for example, Amazon or any Salesforce or whatever the case is, you want to see if you have access to certain data to be able to pull off your solution. And that's usually called a tech spike, which is an R&D experiment, which allows you to test the riskiest thing that you want to figure out if your solution is technically feasible or not. And that's pretty straightforward for feasibility. The next step, risk that you want to validate is your financial risk, and essentially, this is figuring out your cost and your revenue and seeing if this business is worth pursuing. So essentially figuring out how much a customer is willing to pay for a certain product. To figure out a certain price, for example, you may need to quantify the value that you're providing them, how much time you're saving them, and putting that in a model and figuring out the best model for your product. This may be a one-time payment, a freemium model, or a subscription. Whatever the case is, this allows you to focus on that and see what works and what doesn't for your business. And also the second thing is you want to validate is, will this business generate more revenue than cost, which is pretty important, and some solutions have to validate that. An example of an experiment for this would be, and this is a common one you probably all heard, would be, for example, setting up a landing page and driving traffic towards it, and even conducting pre-sales or mock sales. So for example, you could have For your software solution, you could put up a landing page, talk about how your solution solves the pain points, and then put up pricing of the features that you'll be providing, and having people sign up to a wait list by selecting a certain price point or whatever the case is. Now you have people who are interested in your service at a specific price, and you know how you will know if there's a market for it, and they'll be able to pay for it. So those are high level the three risks that we need to focus on, and in that specific order. The lastly is how we actually conduct the experiments and how to design them. So at SwiftRacks, the way we work is we use an experimentation based system where every week on Mondays we establish a test card, which essentially lays down the current hypothesis we are looking to validate, how we will conduct that test, or what we're looking for. Third is what are the measurables, what are the KPIs that we want to measure while conducting this test? And fourth, what is the criterion? What will be able to determine if we passed or failed on that experiment based off of the assumptions we're validating. So first laying down the test, and then after that we lay down the learning card. After we conduct an experiment for a whole week, whatever that experiment is, we go on to filling in the information about the learning card, which is, again, we lay down what the hypothesis was about, what we observed, what were the measurables, that results, and lastly, what are the decisions we're looking to make based off of the data that we gathered. Again, when we talk about experiments could be any activity that you conduct that will bring in data. So for example, when you're first, you want to conduct discovery and to search if your idea is viable or not, you could conduct, for example, customer interviews. You can do surveys. You could do a interactive prototype where you do usability testing. You could have a landing page experiment. There are a lot of experiments you can conduct, and if you look up on Strategizer, they have a library of experiments you can conduct for different types of business model to validate your businesses. And you can also get creative and come up with experiments on your own. For example, for us, based off of the resources we have, sometimes we have some business development resources, so we set up prospecting experiment where we want to figure out if we could sell a B2B software at a certain price point. We go out and reach out to that customer segment with a specific ask and also a price point, and seeing if they're interested. We measure the amount of people that got back to us, how many people want to set up a discovery call for this product, and how many people were able to convert, for example. So it's all up to you. You need to be able to have a high-level overview of your business. You need to identify your assumptions. And when it comes to choosing your assumptions, you want to choose the riskiest and the most valuable assumptions that impact your customers. And once you have identified those, you pick the ones you need to start with. And again, you start with desirability, you move on to feasibility, and then viability. And you conduct your experiments to bring in the data. And that way you can inform your strategy and also your product or service and all the features that you need to deliver. Again, at SwiftRacks, we establish ceremonies for the experiment-based system. So we have daily, weekly, and monthly ceremonies. We, beginning of the week, we lay down the test card and also the learning cards. And we conduct daily stand-ups to help each other make sure we remove blockers. We support each other on the experiments. And lastly, we have monthly strategy calls where we make decisions about where we're looking to focus on, what is the strategy for the product, make updates to the business model or the value proposition, and make sure we're heading in the right way. And yeah, those are the main steps for idea validation, how we conduct tests. The outcomes and benefits of this process are pretty big. So the biggest, most important one is using data to inform your strategy and product. That way, once you conduct these activities and you bring in data, your product will be more focused. You'll be building in a lean approach where you're not overbuilding or underbuilding. You know exactly what the customer wants, what they need, your creative solution and brainstorming process becomes very focused, and you're able to deliver exactly on your value prop, and that helps you reduce your cost, your time, your effort, and yeah, that will drive your strategy all the way. The second point is reducing your risk before investing in engineering. So this is something we've noticed a lot with entrepreneurs that approach us. Before they validate an idea and identify a customer segment that they want to approach, their product is very vague. And because the first experiment they set out to do was they laid down their idea, then they reached out to a software development company, for example, to develop the MVP. And usually the MVP is full of features, it's clunky, and also because they are under funded, they end up hiring teams that are just kind of putting things together, or in the worst case scenario we've seen, where they actually manage the developers themselves and they hire freelancers and put a team together. What ends up happening is a disaster, and the product is usually half baked, and a lot of times it doesn't even reach the market, and the whole idea in the business fails before it even gets to building out the MVP. So that's a pretty scary one we've seen a lot. And third is gaining traction through your test prior to engineering. So the cool thing about this approach and validation is that you're going out of the building and not siloed within yourselves, where you're just building, and nobody knows about what you're doing and you haven't really validated. When you go out and conduct experiments like customer interviews, putting up landing pages, using usability testing, you're interacting with your potential customers. You're getting to know them. You have access to them. You can keep in touch with them. You can sell them later on when the product is ready. You can have them part of your beta list. Those are the same people that you've been working with to develop your product. So it's super powerful. You can have people waiting for your product before you even develop it, which is huge, and could save you a lot of time, effort, and also makes an amazing case for going out and even raising funds, for example, because you have shown proof that, one, your problem statement is very clear. You know who your customer segment is. You understand exactly what they're looking for, and you have the data to back it up, and the traction, for example, a wait list. You have a letter of intent from certain businesses or customers, and or whatever the case is, whatever traction looks like for your product. So those that's overall our entire process and what we do at SwiftRacks. And yeah, well, we've seen it work a lot of times. We've run into really cool scenarios where after we bring in data and we conduct experiments, for example, a lot of clients or customers come to us. They have an idea for a mobile app. After getting the data and figuring out what the customer's main pain problems are, we come up with a completely different solution, like a VR application or a Chrome extension or whatever the case is. So once you have the data and you can look at it, you can get really creative, and that's the beauty about this process. And it's definitely recommended, and everybody should be following it. Now, Zane, to you to take on for the key takeaways. Oh, can't hear you, Zane. Okay, I think Zane's microphone's not working. So yeah, for the key takeaways, as an entrepreneur and innovator, your number one task is to reduce the risk of your idea, so you don't end up wasting time, resources, and effort of everybody on your team. The experiments enable you to discover if your general direction is correct. Also allows you to gather the first insights to course correct rapidly, and helps you confirm the direction you've taken with strong supporting evidence. And the most important things are you should be collaborating across your team and the different skills that you have. That way, everybody's perspective matters and everybody can see the problem and the idea from different lenses, and they can identify opportunities that you may not be able to see on your own. And that's why it's really important to work together as a team and expose the data to everybody. That way, you could all collaborate on the ideas. Secondly, Your idea with a business model canvas and the value prop makes things very clear, aligns the team, and everybody knows where the organization is at any given time. Thirdly, test your highest risk, highest value assumptions through the experiments. That way you reduce your uncertainty, and you also get to interact with your customers and users and bring them on board. And lastly, the last point is using data to inform your product and its strategy. That way it's lean and focused, and you get to market with a little attraction ready on board for you. And that's pretty much it for our presentation. Here's a little bit of information about us and who we are and how you can reach us. And I guess it's time for some questions.
Thank you very much. And not sure if we'll ever get Zane's mic working today, but I know he's here in the chat room. If you have questions, throw them in the Q&A window. If you're looking for some examples, people are saying, hey, give me an example of how to validate this, like their industry. Well, you be specific. What is it you're trying to validate? You can't say, how do I validate my marketing business? Okay, well, what does that mean? Are you trying to validate your customer? You're trying to validate your service? You're trying to validate your pricing? You're trying to validate, what is it you're trying to validate, and your industry? Throw that in the chat room, and we'll see what we can come up with for examples. Now, in the meantime, we have some questions here. Thanks for Tony and Peter. At what stage do you validate by employing the strategies you have highlighted? Secondly, that's pretty obvious. Secondly, how do you validate if you've not actually committed thousands of dollars in building a prototype to use or experiment and collect the data? So there's some good good questions.
For sure. Thank you guys for these questions. So Tony, for the stage that you want to start validating at, and essentially it's right when you get an idea, right? Once you have an idea, you want to lay down your business model, the one that it's in the beginning, it's going to be mostly based off of assumptions. And right away, you need to start testing your market and essentially your market risk. And the way you do that, for example, is conducting customer interviews, putting out surveys, and just having informal conversations with your potential customers. In the beginning, you wanted to search and figure out your first insights. If people actually care about this problem, is it important to them? And are you addressing the root cause of the problem? Starting off with that, then you move on to more complex. You come up with a solution. You identify your infrastructure of the business, how it looks, and there's ways you can conduct those experiments as well. And thirdly is the viability of the business. When you mention, your question says, how do you validate if you have not actually committed thousands of dollars in building a prototype to use? So that's a good question. For the way we do it is that because we're a product development team, when customers come to us, clients come to us, we work with them and we make sure that we do, for example, create a clickable prototype or interactive prototype. So we could demo and do usability testing experiment, for example. There are other ways. We've seen people validate an idea through wireframes, literally on Figma by themselves. They lay out the experience, they create the screens, and they go out there and show a potential customer, does this solve your problem? Are you willing to pay for it? How much? You could do it in really affordable ways, but again, if you have more skills on the team, the higher the fidelity of your test will be, and which essentially gives you stronger evidence when it comes to the data. So that's usually how you can go about it. You can get creative as possible. That's another thing about being an entrepreneur. If you don't have the funds or the resources, you could figure out ways to create mini tests to go out there and try to validate your solution. So that's that, Tony. I hope that helped.
Yeah, Tony, let us know what industry you're in. Like, you don't always have to build a product to validate something, start by building a community. If depending what you're into, join a meetups, go talk to people, like just physically get out and talk to people and start moving towards the solution and the problems at work. And then you're much closer to building a prototype after you've talked to people and get that step forward. So, it depends where you are, but get out of the office right away and get out of your head and get into your customer's head.
Mhm.
When do you know if you need an investor or a backer for your MVP?
That's a really good question. It depends on the product and the idea you're dealing with. Some products, if you're in a regulatory space and you need to meet compliance and you cannot go to market with something very small, you may need hundreds of thousands of dollars to start, and that may require you to get an investor. And to go to an investor and pitch that idea, you may need to show a lot of proof and a lot of evidence that there is a market for this and people are excited for it and they want it. So the question is, it really depends on where you are and what stage your startup is. Um, if you are not able to afford a product, maybe you should reduce your features and focus on one problem at a time and create something as small as possible to start. And like Craig mentioned, again, you can start off with a community or whatever the case is until you could show proof and evidence to be able to go to an investor and raise that money. And another piece of advice is you can go out there and start pitching to investors and see their feedback and reaction. They may be able to tell you that you're too early. Come back to us when you have X amount of revenue or whatever the case is, and then you know what the goalpost is, and you should be striving for.
You can always show traction. So if you're looking to talk to an investor, they're going to want to see traction in some form of another. If you need 100,000 plus to invest to build a platform to do something, then how do you prove to them that it's needed? Do you have a certain number of followers, emails signing up, a community that's so big? I know a lady who built a dating app, and how she got her investors was she went around 3 months and did in-person events where she personally talked to people and got them sign up, over 3,000 signups to download her app before it went live. So that's, hustle, where these are people she met, just not just a survey signed online. That kind of hustle, you can always build traction to prove that no matter what business you're in. So don't forget that. And if you can build an MVP and start making money without building something, for example, I know somebody who is building an anime platform for streaming and whatnot. He's making money by building pop-up shops, selling anime stuff in between, and building his list and making money and showing that there's a demand for the product. So there's always ways to do that. What are practical and cost-effective strategies that a startup that is bootstrapping can employ in validating their business idea?
Mm-hmm. That's a good question as well. So the cool thing about experiments is that you could plan your experiments how you want to and at the pace that you want to conduct them at as well. One way, like I mentioned, was you should have a cross-functional team. If you're able to have that, that's one of your goals, to build a team to build your startup. So if you have a team, let's say have a product engineer, product designer, and the CEO or the founder wants to act as the product manager, then you could design experiments that are small enough where they don't cost you money, but they allow you to go out there and get some information, get some feedback about the assumptions that you made. And like I mentioned in the presentation, there are a list of experiments you can search online. For example, if you search up Strategizer's experiment library, it will tell you all the experiments that you can conduct that are pretty affordable. A lot of them do take time more than anything. But yeah, you do need to spend something. Some experiments may need a budget, but most will focus mostly on time and the actual skills to design the experiments and actually execute them.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll give you one example I like to share with people. Sorry, you probably didn't know that I teach idea validation, and I'm kind of jumping in for Zane because he doesn't have a microphone. So I like the 3-page website. It's one other thing I do all the time, where you've got a product. My example is buy my red shoe. Here's my red shoe. Buy my red shoe. It's $159.99. Click the buy now button. You go to the next page. You pick your size. You pick whatever customization, and you go to purchase it. And the third page is, oh, sorry, we're out of stock. We're not shipping to your area, or we're not available. Put us your email in, and we'll let you know when it's available. The people who give you the email, they would have bought right? So they're kind of, that gives you an experiment to give you an idea of conversion rate, how many people you can sell. You can use that to drive traffic to multiple sites to do pricing. Like say, okay, how many did I sell at $2.99? How many did I sell at $59.99? That kind of stuff. So that's an experiment that anybody can do for next to nothing.
Exactly.
Correct.
Next question here. What would you say about conducting experiments if you have a few low-hanging fruit you can tackle to solve urgent pain points? Can one experiment with these solutions at once? Are you saying can one experiment with multiple solutions at once? It sounds like they're trying to do multiple experiments at once.
So the phrase few low-hanging fruits, that's in your definition. I'm not sure exactly what you mean by low-hanging fruits. And also, I believe you're asking if you could, your first experiment be the solution right away. You could definitely, like if you have a problem that's, you feel like the solution would be very easy to create and it doesn't cost you much, then you could go ahead and skip all the experiments, and your first experiment could be that solution itself. You just have to be able to evaluate the risk that you're taking on, and how much it can impact what you're doing. And if it's not detrimental to you and it's not a very high risk, then you can go ahead and build the solution and test out if people are willing to use your solution for that problem. It all depends on where you are and what you classify as risky for yourself, and you can make decisions based off of that. I hope that kind of answers your question.
I think so. We've got a couple more questions here. What if my idea has already been validated by others in another form? Can I use that as evidence that my idea works?
So, sorry, could you repeat that?
Absolutely. What if my idea has already been validated by someone else? Can I use that as evidence? Like if there's competition already out there, can I use it as evidence that my idea works?
Yeah, so that is a strategy we've seen. One strategy, for example, is figuring out what your competitors' testimonials are, for example, and what people are struggling with in the reviews, and kind of building a solution that addresses those. And yes, having competitors in a space is a good indicator that there is a market, but you should also have a really good understanding of your customer segment that you want to start with, the focusing the solution on, and the problem that you're facing, that they're facing, sorry. So you could take that route. You just have to be careful that you have your own approach and you're starting at a different level than they are, and you might not have the same funding or the same you're not at the same stage as they are. So for example, if you're looking at a competitor and they're already established and they're addressing a market that's massive and they're solving problems across different industries, and you're coming in and you want to kind of replicate them, you might not be able to replicate them at that scale. You need to figure out a smaller niche that you can address that are underserved in their product, and you could focus on that to make a solution that's effective and their customers are willing to onboard to yours.
All right, the questions are fast and furious here. How long would you say this process typically takes? How long could the data collection process take? What tools would you suggest to get hands-on statistics?
That's a really good question. So it depends at the pace that your team can work by, and also how big your product is and how big the problem you're trying to solve is. For example, we've seen some products that needed a couple of $1 million to actually execute, and those needed experiments for at least a year, for example, to gather all the data to make sure that they're building the right product for the right customer. And some products are very simple, and they can identify the problem really well, and there's a segment for it that's accessible by the founding team. So the experiments they needed to conduct were not as long and didn't require so much effort because they already have the data and access to a lot of things already right off the bat. But generally for us, when we work with clients, our product discovery process is somewhere between 2 to 4 months from ideation, solution brainstorming, and also laying down the product requirements and everything like that. And this whole process is conducted through experiments that we conduct weekly, starting from, for example, customer interviews all the way to validation like a landing page or making sales.
How would you go about validating a B2B idea where your customers are potentially businesses across different industries? For example, planner software for transportation, logistics, and mobility industry.
That's a really good question. So for B2B, I would say focus on a niche industry, focus on one. Make sure you understand their problems really well, their pain points. And once you've identified everything that you can about the problem, also identified the root cause of the problem, then come up with your solution to focus entirely on that for the first version of your product. So your features are directly solving those pain points to the best of their ability. And starting with that niche, making sure that you have scaled in that niche, you've brought on your first customers, they love your product. Then as you have the funding and you've proven that this works for that specific industry, then you can slowly start opening up your product to address other markets, and you can start marketing towards them and so forth. The reason why I'm saying focus on one niche, because it's really expensive in terms of development to focus on multiple niches and have all the features available for all those different industries, but also your sales and marketing efforts. If you're conducting sales and marketing for for multiple industries, then your messaging is going to be more vague. It's going to be harder to get the team to find those customers because they can go across between all the different industries, and the data that you'll have will be less among all those industries. So it's harder for you to optimize and get better at what you do. So I would say focus on one niche to start and then take it from there.
What would be the best way to experiment to figure out a pricing model for your product, especially if the potential customer is already using a platform that solves their problem at no cost? Wow.
That's an interesting one. If there's a competitive product that solves it at no cost, how do you make money? I would say figure out what advantage that you have over that competitor product, and you'll just have to kind of get creative and figure out, because it's hard to give you an answer without knowing what you're trying to do and what exactly you're trying to solve and how you're looking to solve it. But there are a lot of pricing models, and I would again set an experiment, with your intuition. Go for the first intuition that you have toward a pricing model, and see if people stick to it, and make sure that your costs and your revenue make sense.
Good answers. The other thing is, think about outside the box, right? Like when you talk about making something where there's already something free, think about bottled water, right? They're charging you for something, and now you'll pay more for a bigger brand of bottled water than what you'd find a great value at Walmart, and versus getting free from the tap or the fountain. So there are plenty of examples of that kind of thing out there. So how do you set your brand apart and make the free options seem far inferior? All right.
For sure.
Great presentation. Loved how clearly explained everything. Have you ever run into an issue where people believing so heavily in their ideas that they might be biased when interpreting data from experiments? And how do you prevent that?
That's a really good point. Usually entrepreneurs are really confident in their ideas, and they're really ambitious, and they want to pursue it and get it out there as soon as possible. So it's definitely a problem that we've seen over and over. The way that you combat this is through the data transparency and the cross-functional collaboration. When you bring in data and the entire team is looking at it, everybody's going to have questions and everybody's going to see the data in a different perspective and will point at certain things. So, for example, if your team is composed of 3-4 team members, you have the decision maker sitting on there as well. When the data comes in, it's really hard to ignore what the data is saying when it's right there in front of you, and there's also teammates telling you that this is not a good idea. So the best thing that you can do is make sure you expose all the data, and you make sure it's reviewed by the entire team, and you have sort of a voting or a decision making system with the team to make sure that you make the right decisions together and go in the right direction.
And define the success criteria when you're defining the test so that everyone can agree with it ahead of time. You know, it's 50%, 60%, you know, what's a positive answer, what's a negative answer, and what makes this experiment successful or failure. If you determine that ahead of time, you're less likely to be manipulated by bias than afterwards where you're trying to get something that makes more sense to your hypothesis.
You nailed it, Craig.
Yeah,
for sure.
This is great. This is great. If you have any questions, I'm going to just ramble on for a second so you can put your stuff in the chat room if you have any more questions. Don't forget to experiment. I worked with a little company called Lego, and we designed some very interesting experiments around. They were trying to figure out what people would pay for augmented reality experience around their Lego playset. I don't know if you've seen some of the things, but if you buy certain playsets and you hold up your phone, it comes alive and things happen and you can battle and all that kind of stuff. So we were doing in-house experiments at Apple stores and a few other things. Think outside the box. There's 1,000 things you can do with companies to either do surveys, get in front of people. And I'm going to give you this other tip as a shooting fish in a barrel example. I always tell people, start a conference. If you're trying to figure out if you're tackling a great pain point in an area, start making a contest list, call all the biggest people on LinkedIn you can find and say, hey, I'm running a conference in the area that you work in about the biggest problem people are facing. I'd love to be a guest speaker. I'd love to be a panelist, love to be this. Set it 6 to 8 months in the future. Do a little survey with everyone. Make sure you get the top 10 list of the problems everyone's talking about, because that helps. And then 6 months in the future, you have a room full of people with everyone's looking at you leading it. You've got all these industry experts talking about it, and everybody who has the problem that your company's there to solve in the room. And if you can't sell to them, you got a problem. All right. I was just looking for, yes, we're going to share the recording. It's up on YouTube, but I'm going to make sure that Zane and Howdy have the links. I'm going to give them your emails for everyone who registered so they can share the presentation, share the slides, and share the checklist, validation checklist they did. Final words from the two of you, and where can people go to find out more one more time?
Essentially, we're excited to see what you guys make. It's really exciting to be able to present this. We've seen amazing things come out of this process. People coming up with creative solutions, saving a lot of time, years, and effort on their startup before they invest a lot of money. So we definitely recommend it. And if you guys need any help, I want to ask questions, you want to collaborate or partner up with us, we're here. We'd love to go out for coffee, chat with you, and we'll always be there to help. So thank you, everyone. And yeah, hopefully we meet soon.
I missed one question here. Sorry if you're hanging out.
Yeah.
Thanks for the amazing presentation. I make physical products in-house. I have a lot of design I want to validate. You think it's a good idea to pre-sale with rendered pictures and videos, or what would you recommend?
So that's interesting. With yes, you could definitely do that. But it also depends on the type of product and if it delivers the message across of what you're trying to do. Another thing is if you are selling something that requires some sort of engineering, there's legal aspect to it, you may need to make sure that it's safe to sell the product when it's ready or whatever the case is. But it is definitely possible. You can set up a landing page and sell the renders and see how people react to it, but it really depends on the product and how if people can pick up the value from the render.
Yeah, all legal issues aside from whatever you're building, because you have to tackle all those. This is not a bad idea to do it from like a picture or a rendering. The other thing you might want to consider is, I can't remember what they call them, but I would put it up and say that it's regular. You do whatever you want. These things are regular $100, but if we get 50 people ordering them, you'll get it for $75, and try and drive like a FOMO campaign to try and get everybody to buy at that time, to get a group purchase happening, or people to buy within a period of time, to try and motivate people. That'll give you a better idea, I think. All right. Anybody still there?
I'm here. Sorry about that.
Thank you, everyone, for this, and thanks for all the questions. Thank you for Zane and Hattie. Despite all the technical issues, I think we got all the messages across. The presentation was great, and the questions were great. All the feedback is wonderful. I really appreciate you taking the time and giving us all these insights on validating your idea.
For sure. Thank you, guys. Really appreciate it.